Hello everyone and welcome to the Melbourne Traditionalist, episode 10. I'm Mark Moncrieff from Upon Hope and I have with me a new guest, Mark Richardson from Oz Conservative. How are you?
I'm really well, thank you Mark, and thanks for having me on.
And we're the two co-conveners of the Melbourne Traditionalists, so it's really good to have my compatriot here and to drill his mind as I will, and hopefully we'll do a number of episodes where the two of us are conversing.
Oh, that'd be great. Yeah.
Now, you were telling me off air about the Federal Treasurer Joe Frydenberg.
Yeah, it was on the internet yesterday that the Business Insider publication ran an article reporting on a meeting that Frydenberg held with various business leaders, and it was to reassure them that the Australian economy and the economic miracle is going to continue, and his plan for this is to keep immigration ramped up and the supply of housing depressed so that house prices will rise a further 10%, and according to Frydenberg this will add 1% onto our GDP. So that's the Liberal Party economic plan for Australia. I just find it mind-boggling.
There's not a single part of that I go, hey, that's a good idea.
No.
Every single part is a terrible idea.
Yeah. Look, I know if you've got investment properties, maybe you'll kind of benefit in the short term, but for most Australians, it's disastrous. And yet that's the plan.
And, you know, there's nobody else to vote for.
Well, that's right. you think, well, do we want to vote Labor? But then you get other worse problems there. So I guess we just have to encourage people to vote for whatever minor parties are out there.
Yeah. And, you know, at the weekend we had the AFL Grand Final, 100,000 people, 90,000 people going to a football match, probably millions of people watching it. And then we have these terrible news from the federal government talking about how they're going to screw us over more, and who's going to complain about it?
Yeah, I think the French are leading the way here compared to us, really, aren't they? That they're still on the streets marching. The yellow vest movement, that's really impressive.
It's nearly 12 months.
It's nearly 12 months and they're still going. And, you know, there's a lot of bad things said about the French, but you've got to give them credit that they're not just watching football, are they?
Yeah, exactly. Or if they are, they're still out there doing something.
Yeah.
You know, letting people know that they're against this.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've known you since 2010.
Yeah, it's been a while.
I was working at a job in the city, and the job was ending. It was a contract job, and I was very annoyed with how things were going politically. And I just said to myself, I can't be the only person in Australia who feels this way. So I went online and I looked for someone who was also concerned about it. Actually, it didn't take me very long to find Oz Conservative, your side.
Yeah. And that was really the purpose of Oz Conservative, was because when I was in my mid-20s, in the 1990s, it was very isolating to be a dissident politically back then, because there was no social media or internet, and the sense of, am I the only person to think this or to feel this way?
Yeah,
was strong. So I did think the first step was just to have at least a banner which people could then gather around, and Oz Conservative was meant to at least partly fulfil that role. So I'm glad in your case it actually did serve that purpose.
And you know, we got together, and it's quite remarkable how close our political views are.
Yeah.
You know, I would say that the point of disagreement is, you know, about 5%.
Yeah.
You know. Now, how long did Oz when did Oz Conservative start?
Right. So pretty early on, really, because my memory is that the internet became widely used very early in the 2000s, and I began with Lawrence Auster's site, View from the Right.
Yeah. Very important site.
Yeah, that was at the time was really important, and at least that connected people up internationally. There still wasn't much in Australia, but but in America there was. There were a few people anyway. And my memory is that was around 2002, maybe, that was happening, and Oz Conservative followed on pretty quickly. It might have been 2003 or 2004.
2003.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, it started small. As you know, it's not easy when you set up a blog. You start off small.
Yes.
And it's still obviously not mass media, but yeah, it's done okay over the years.
Yeah. Now, why did you actually start your own site? Why didn't you just continue to talk at Review from the Right or post at View from the Right?
Good question. I actually did at one stage try and contribute to a common website, but the views were too diverse. It didn't work in the end. It just ended up being an argument between the people contributing to the site. Look, I think as you know, I had a very specific idea about what had gone wrong in society, and I just wanted to express that on the website. And I find too that writing articles clarifies your own ideas. You start to write an article and either it works and it seems to fit together, or you discard what you're writing.
Well, you, Mr. Richardson, are the reason that I have my blog, and ironically, because there were things that you were writing and I went, I would have said it differently.
Yeah.
And then I thought to myself, well, it's not your job to write my thoughts.
Yeah.
It's my job. And when I did that, you were very supportive. And my site started 10 years after yours. And but you also said that it would be very much the case that your thinking would be clarified. And when I heard that, I was like, I don't know, I think I know what my thoughts are. But you were 100% right. You know, you sit down to write, and often I find that I write things that I didn't consciously know that I thought.
Yeah.
And there's knowledge there that I didn't consciously know that I had.
Yeah, it's a real test.
I assume that's the same for you.
Absolutely. That as you write, sometimes you're developing ideas. I think that's exactly right. And so you're developing your own ideas, testing them, and as well, I think another purpose for setting up the site and my own site was, as I said before, just as a point to help organise things here in Australia.
Yeah.
And I think early on with Melbourne Traditionalists, quite a few of the new members came through Oz Conservative, at least in the
absolutely.
In the early days, I think.
Absolutely. And I also, so were you born on the dissident right?
No, I wasn't. Probably in some ways, in terms of my personality, yes, but it took a major detour.
Yeah.
In the very early days at uni. So I was kind of your typical sort of artsy intellectual type, and picked up on some of the hypocrisies of people who preached liberal ideas of equality and freedom, but then you see how that isn't really embedded in society completely, and you call people out. And I became a leftist for a period of time at university, but then became disillusioned with that in a really major way. And I then was lucky enough to have a little bit of time in life to hit the Baillieu Library at Melbourne Uni and to try and figure out what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that then led me to traditionalist ideas.
So really from your own readings?
Yeah, sort of independent. I had to do it independently at the time.
So we're talking 1980s or 1990s?
Early 90s, I'd
Yep.
say. So there was very, very little. I can remember the only publication that there was that was National Review,
Yep.
which you could find in newsagents at the time. And there was a few interesting things in there. But apart from that, there was very little. Like, there wasn't even... Back then, if you go back to the 80s in Australia, most of the intellectual types, they were not just liberals, they were left liberals.
Yeah.
It was rare even to find a libertarian or any kind of a right-wing liberal.
Yes.
And it was an orthodoxy, it was a very stifling orthodoxy. And to step outside of that was not easy. And there were very few people who did it. And there was no really organised dissident right. There was a group called the League of Rights who
Yes.
had conspiracy theories and things like that. So really, you had, if you were going to figure out an alternative politics, you had to do it yourself.
Now, you've said to me in conversation that a big part of the push away from liberalism was seeing the social life of people around you.
Yeah, that's true. So when I went to university as an 18-year-old in the arts department there,
Yep.
I got to know a lot of young people, and they came in very enthusiastic and bright-eyed and very attractive personalities in some ways. And within a year or two, a lot of them had really hit rock bottom, and it was because of they'd really embraced the whole libertine, just sex and drugs and whatever it was.
Yeah.
And it was really sad for me to see it. It really did have a big impact on me, especially the young women. That if you see a beautiful 17, 18-year-old woman, vivacious, exactly, full of life, and exactly how, as a young man, you'd want a young woman to be.
Yeah.
And to become friends with them, but then to have to observe them sort of becoming addicted and demoralised and jaded, and all in the space of a year or two.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, the illusion of liberalism as liberation, you know, you do start to question. And I know today there are young men on the right too who see that youth culture and have the same response. But it hit me really hard, I have to say.
Yeah. And it's interesting that it didn't... men of our generation, they saw the faults, but they still went, oh, well, this is how it is. And what's interesting and encouraging is that what we're seeing nowadays is so many young people, young men coming through and going, no, this is awful, I don't support this, I don't accept this, this is not normal.
Yeah, I agree. It's interesting, isn't it? That maybe my generation of men thought they could somehow survive it or
I think we thought that it was a blip.
Yeah.
You know, it was everything could right itself.
Well, I think you're right. I mean, I can remember thinking, I was so naive as an 18-year-old. I can remember thinking, oh, you know,
I wasn't. I knew it all.
No, I can remember thinking, oh, you know, somebody will see that this is wrong. The church, and that they'll start to speak up, or the politicians, or somebody in authority will just, and it was realising what the establishment was committed to that was a big turning point for me. That realising that they weren't going to come to the rescue at all.
Yeah.
Because of what they were committed to ideologically. Yeah.
Talk to me a bit about Lawrence Auster.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting. So people of this generation may not know too much about Lawrence Auster, which is a shame.
Yeah.
So
his site, View from the Right, is still online.
Yep.
So you can still go and read his original thoughts.
And you will learn heaps if you do.
Yeah.
There's a lot of insight in there. So very early on, when the internet first really became widely available, Lawrence Auster, who was an American, he was
a New York Jew.
Yeah, well, by ethnicity,
Yeah.
he had converted
Although
to...
his family was very secular.
Yeah, secular family. He himself had converted to Protestantism of some sort. He was a Episcopalian, I think.
All right. I thought that he actually went to... Because he was a hippie.
Originally, yeah.
And he actually went to Asia and lived there for many years studying Eastern philosophy and religion. And it was only on his return to the United States in the 1980s that he was really shocked, awake.
That could be right. I'm actually not sure, but that
all right,
could be
go.
right.
Yeah.
But I do know he was I think it was Episcopalian.
He did become an Episcopalian.
Yeah.
Which is an Anglican in the rest of the world.
That's right. So, but he was an interesting character. He was a very prickly character in some ways. He demanded that people were very consistent in what they believed. He was very good at picking apart those kind of things. But he ran a website, View from the Right, which was for a period of time very popular. He was getting, I forget the exact figures, but it was a really impressive number. It was hundreds of thousands per month of hits on his website, and he was a very principled traditionalist. He was not in any sense an establicon or anything like that.
No, absolutely. Yes.
The discussions were great. James Culp was a regular for a period of time.
Yep.
And Zippy Catholic was another one. I threw my 2 cents in as well. And it was kind of exciting at the start because we had just come together for the first time, and we were trying to develop sort of the basics of the politics, and to be finally being able to discuss things with a group of intelligent people, it was exciting to be part of that.
And when I read his work, what's obvious is that he did the hard thinking. He didn't take the easy options, and I think you and I have also had to travel that path where you have to do a lot of hard thinking. And it hurts.
Yeah.
And it not just hurts your brain while you're thinking it, but it also hurts you in the rest of the world, because you're like, this thing that I thought was all right, it's actually not.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think Auster felt that. He once wrote me a private email where he was just wondered at how few people there were who thought differently to the mainstream.
Yeah.
It's kind of like almost a cry in the dark or something.
I mean, I feel that way, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you have to remember that this was before any kind of organised dissident right. So it was much later on that the men's movement developed, and out of that, a much larger movement on social media.
Yes.
So you
So
really...
it's before the alt-right, it's before the Tea Party, it's before the men's rights movement.
So I could come home from work in the early 2000s, sit down at the computer and read everything that the traditionalist right had written on the internet. You could keep up with everything in a way you just couldn't do now.
Yes, yeah.
It was different times. So I know sometimes it seems like things haven't improved or changed, and obviously we're still really on the back foot, but if you compare the situation now to what it was in, say, 2003 or 2004, it's a lot better now, at least, than it was then.
Yeah, I do think that's true. Even when I found your site, I was like, there's not that many others that are actually worthwhile. Yeah.
So there's still a lot to do, but the breakthrough really came when the men's movement, the breakthrough to a sort of a more instead of a few isolated people,
Yeah.
to something more like a movement. That happened when the men's movement came around.
Yes.
About 2010 maybe, so
Yeah,
roughly
a
around.
little bit before 2008.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, around then. And at first it looked like the men's movement might just be a sort of a liberalish movement, but luckily it developed more toward that distant right.
It's a fascinating story.
Yeah.
You know, the group of men who started off with the only example I can think of where an organisation started on the left,
yeah,
and actually moved to the right.
It's incredible.
And you know, it started off very liberal. You know, basically where the problem with the world is that the feminist promise hasn't been realised.
Yeah, and that we need to extend that to the lives of men.
Yeah, exactly. And then it was gradually just a total rejection of that. And now it's a bit embarrassing that they ever started there, but it's actually the logical place to start.
Yeah, and it's continued to move. It's interesting. I mean, if you look at Roosh or someone like that, the journey it just continues to move toward a more traditional outlook. So yeah, I guess we have to keep that in mind as a positive of what's happened in the last decade or so.
Yeah, you know, another thing that I think is very important was the Tea Party in the United States, and the Tea Party came about as a response to the election of President Obama, and it was totally ridiculed. And it was really the last time that ordinary people could get together and say, hey, we support conservative values, which means a bit of traditionalism and a bit of liberalism. And they were just humiliated. And I think that had a big effect, because people who were then coming up went, well, that's not the way to go. And they actually moved to the right by necessity. They had to.
Yeah.
Because the next thing you have is the alt-right.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? That I mean, and the alt-right is it's still a diverse creature.
Yes.
But yeah, that sudden breakthrough that took place. I mean, look, social media helped a bit, it has to be said. So if I go back again, if I go back to the 80s and 90s, I mean, one of the problems you had is that you had, here in Melbourne, you had the Age newspaper, the Australian came in eventually, became more popular, but left liberals had the media all sewn up, and there was no alternative social media. You had to kind of set up your own newspaper, which of course is a really difficult thing to do compared to running a blog site or something like that. So,
yeah, absolutely, and a lot more expensive.
Yeah. So yeah, that was one of the. I mean, my response. I once, trying to get things set up, I once sort of leafleted half of the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, letterboxed, and but it's such a difficult thing to do.
Oh, I agree. I in my local area, I've leafleted over 3,000 homes, and I've had 2 responses.
Well, that's right. It's just not an effective way to reach people.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the lessons for me is that instinct you have that control of the media is so important is true, in fact, and that we do have to try and do whatever we can to keep that social media, that independent social media happening as much as we can.
Yeah. Getting back to Lawrence Auster for a little bit. I know that he quite respected you, because when you commented, he would reply, and he wouldn't rip into you, because he, as you said, he was a very prickly character.
Well, that's right. So when he did correct me, it was tended to be very gently. So yeah, that was a difference. Yeah, I think he did actually, and I think, and it was mutual. I had a great respect for him as well. Yeah. I think partly it was a kindred spirit kind of thing, that we were just two people with the same perplexed at where liberalism had taken the modern world, and wanting a really principled response to it, a kind of a principled politics in response. which was a little bit unusual for the time, that most people just collapsed back into liberalism in one way or the other. So you had to be kind of tough-minded, and he was.
Yeah, yeah.
And maybe that was why there was some mutual respect there. Unfortunately, of course, he got sick and passed on, which was...
Not long after I started my site, actually, back in 2013.
And that was a terrible setback, really, because his site had been the flagship.
And he had a lot more to contribute.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it was because he was so good at picking up on where people were not really being principled and calling them out, that it kind of demanded that you thought through your ideas, and he played that role really well. But he was also really... he had that creative mind as well, where he could run with ideas and develop them, and run with what other people had as ideas and contribute to them. And he had this flagship website, so no, it was a terrible thing when he did pass on.
Yeah. Now, where can people find more of your thinking? I think they know, but let's confirm it.
It's ozconservative.blogspot.com.au, so that's OZ-Oz. And you can also find me on Twitter, but there's a link on my website.
And what is it? It's 16 years that you've been blogging for.
Yeah, it's something like, if you really want something, if you have insomnia and want something to read at night, there's about 2,500 posts, I think, something like that. There's a few gathered there, so there should be something there, hopefully.
And I'm Mark Moncrieff, and you can find more of my thinking at Upon Hope. Just type that into your favourite search engine and you'll find me. And thank you, Mark Richardson.
And thank you. First podcast.
And have a good day, everyone.